The fire starts at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in January 1922. No candles, no gas lamps left burning, no electrical fault. The house doesn't even have electricity. The Frost family wakes up to flames crawling up their bedroom walls, and by morning, there's nothing left but ash and the memory of 3 weeks of absolute hell. This isn't a ghost story. It's something stranger, and the truth behind it is darker than any poltergeist. Caledonia Mills is a small farming community in Antigonish County, Nova Scotia. Remote, deeply Catholic, and in 1922 largely cut off from the modern world. Alexander MacDonald is 56 years old, a farmer who has worked this land his entire life. He's not superstitious. He's not the type to see things that aren't there. He built that house with his own hands, raised his adopted daughter Mary Ellen there, and when the strange events begin in January of that year, his first instinct is to find a rational explanation. The first incidents are small. Fires appear on the walls, not spreading from a hearth or lamp, just blooming from nowhere on the wallpaper. They put them out. Another one appears. They put that out too. In the first 2 weeks, the family extinguishes no fewer than 38 separate fires throughout the house. 38. And not one of them has an identifiable source. Neighbors come. A priest comes. Provincial police send Constable Johnny McPherson, a practical man who doesn't believe in ghosts and says so openly. He moves into the house to investigate. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because McPherson watches a fire start on a wall 2 feet in front of him, with no one in the room but himself. He writes in his report that he cannot explain it.
This is a police officer documenting something he cannot account for in an official government record that still exists today. But here's what they didn't tell you. While Constable McPherson is watching walls ignite from the inside, something else is happening to the family. Furniture begins moving on its own. Chairs drag themselves across the floor. Buckets of water tip over with no hand near them. The family's livestock starts dying. Horses, cattle, found dead in the barn with no injury. And Mary Ellen, the teenage daughter, begins to behave strangely. She sleepwalks. She speaks in voices not her own. The local priest performs a blessing. It changes nothing. Word spreads fast because in 1922, a haunted farmhouse in rural Nova Scotia is exactly the kind of story that travels. Journalists arrive from Halifax. A researcher named Walter Prince, associated with the American Society for Psychical Research, makes the trip. Prince is a serious man, a trained investigator who approaches the case methodically, with skepticism. He interviews everyone, documents everything, and ultimately concludes that Mary Ellen herself is somehow connected to the events, possibly generating them unconsciously. Modern researchers might call this a classic poltergeist profile. Young adolescent at the center, extreme emotional stress, inexplicable physical phenomena. But Prince can't explain the mechanics, and neither could anyone else. Now here's where the story shifts, because this is where the money comes in. The MacDonald farm sits on land that had been quietly coveted by a timber company operating in Antigonish County. The region was rich in hardwood, beech, maple, yellow birch, and by 1922, the provincial timber industry was generating millions in export revenue, shipping to American and British markets, rebuilding after the First World War. Small farms that sat on premium timberland were being acquired, sometimes through fair purchase, sometimes through pressure. The MacDonalds had resisted multiple offers. Their land, assessed at the time at roughly $1,200, sat adjacent to a timber corridor that would have been worth 20 times that in logging rights alone. After the fires begin, after the story spreads, the family becomes unsellable. No buyer wants a haunted property. But more importantly, the family itself becomes impossible. Neighbors grow frightened. The community, deeply superstitious beneath its Catholic propriety, begins to whisper. The MacDonalds are isolated. Their credibility collapses. And when the final fire burns the house to the ground in January 1922, they leave. They simply leave. They abandon the land. We don't know who bought it. The county records from that period are incomplete.
But the timber company operating in that corridor expanded its territory significantly in 1922 and 1923. The connection is circumstantial, but it's there. This isn't just history. The pattern, using fear, rumor, and manufactured crisis to drive families off valuable land, has a name. Historians call it blockbusting when it happens to black neighborhoods in mid-century American cities. Developers in the 1950s and 60s would send agents door to door, spreading panic about changing demographics, then buy up properties at destroyed prices and resell them at massive profit. The Federal Housing Administration was complicit,
redlining entire communities and ensuring that institutional money only flowed one direction. The mechanism is identical. Create fear, isolate the target, wait for collapse, acquire. In Nova Scotia in 1922, the fear just wore a different costume. The real demon in the Caledonia Mills case was never identified. Mary Ellen MacDonald lived the rest of her life under the shadow of those 3 weeks. Walter Prince's report is still cited in paranormal literature, framed as a mystery. And it is a mystery. The fires, the moving furniture, the inexplicable events that a police constable witnessed with his own eyes remain genuinely unexplained. But the mystery that matters, the one history quietly buried, is who benefited when that family walked away from their land. We've been taught to look at events like this as curiosities, strange footnotes in local history, fuel for ghost tours and Halloween specials. But the people who got rich off fear never showed up in the ghost story. They never do. The haunting is the headline. The land transfer is the footnote. That's not an accident. So here's what I want you to think about. Right now, today, wherever you live, what communities are being made to feel unsafe, crazy, or cursed? What happens to the land when they leave? The playbook hasn't changed. Only the ghost has. If that question unsettles you, it should. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling back the curtain on the history they'd rather you forget. The stories that sound like legend usually aren't.